How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today, I have the pleasure of talking to David Pepose, who I've interviewed before. Small interview at New York Comic Con. But today, I get to have a little longer interview to talk about some things and in the past and some things in the work. So, how are you, Dave? How have
I'm
you
doing
been?
great. Thank you so much for having me, Omar. I'm really excited to be on the show, and yeah, I'm so excited to chat with you about my next project, Space Ghost, over at Dynamite, which will be
Dynamite.
coming out.
Yes. I'm excited for that too because that was one of my favorite properties, and it seems to be Space Coast disappears for a while, and nobody hears about where it's going to be and what's going to
Yeah,
happen. And then from time to time, Space Coast will show up again in comic
yeah.
book format. But before we start talking about the Space Ghost adventures you're going to be on, tell me a little bit about yourself. How you got started into the whole comics industry? Like, were you
Sure.
a fan of comics growing up? And if you
Yeah.
were, what were some of your favorite writers?
Yeah, I'm a third generation comics fan. I've been
Love
reading
that. Okay.
comics my whole life. My grandfather was a big comics fan. He passed that down to my mother, who passed that down to me. Yeah, I grew up, I grew up in the early '90s. So David Michelini and Eric Larson's Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man was
Mhm.
really a seminal book for me. Mark Grunwald's Captain America was another big one. Nightfall and Death and Return of Superman, Kingdom Come. Those were all really seminal books for me. Um, so yeah, I've been in various roles in the industry for about 15 years now. I got my start as an intern working editorial at DC Comics. I
Okay.
worked on books like
Okay, let me ask
yeah,
you. Let's take a step back. How does one go about becoming an intern
yeah.
at DC Editorial? Did you raise your hand? Did you win a lottery? Like, how does that work?
I knocked on doors for about 3 years straight.
Okay, persistency. Okay.
Yeah, what had happened was I had written a fan letter my sophomore year of college, um, and talked about how much I love DC, and asked. I think I was looking forward to 52 is what I had mentioned, and
Okay.
I asked, by the way, how does one intern at a place like DC? And I got a form letter back from Ivan Cohen, the co-creator of Jesse Quick on the Multiversity Titans book. Um, Ivan was working at DC at the time. He was working in editorial, and he forgot to take his email address off the signature. So I wound up pestering Ivan for the rest of the year, um, and he wound up interviewing me for an intern role, and told me, "Listen, you're a sophomore in college. Like you can apply again next year."
Okay.
So I did that the following year. Was told, "You're a junior. You can apply again next year." And finally, I called every other week my senior year, until they finally said, "Okay, all right, we've had it with you for 3 years. Fine, you want to intern for us so bad, intern for us." Um, and it really changed my life. It was such a wonderful experience. I really got to learn about all the different component parts that make a comic, and I really got to know, all right, a lot of people know who's writing a comic, and a lot of people will tend to know who the penciler is, but like a lot of people don't know who the inkers or colorists or letterers or production people or
Mhm.
editors are in a comic. They're not paying attention to that sort of stuff. That experience really taught me a lot about that. Um,
So yeah, in case anybody wants to break into the comic book industry, because
sure.
this happens a lot in like Hollywood, right? Like I,
Yeah.
I have really good friends of mine that were trying to become movie stars or movie directors, or and they all tell me the same thing. Oh, dude, I had two jobs and I was working for a production company and I didn't get paid for
Yeah.
3 years.
Yeah.
Some of them can tough it out, some of them can't, and it was all different types of jobs, right? But learning the industry, and the ones that are tough, the ones that actually want to make it,
Yeah.
are actually filming movies now, whether it's for Hallmark or some of them are working for DreamWorks. But it's really cool to hear like that side of things. So I want to know a little bit, if you can tell us, not
Sure.
in a big amount of detail, but like what is the job of an intern at DC Comics? What does that look like for
Sure.
anybody that's trying to do something very similar?
So I want to start this with the caveat that my internship was in 2008, so things may have
Okay,
changed significantly,
of course.
especially post COVID and the like. But for me, my life as an intern, there were a few things that I did, collecting reference art for artists. So, for example, say an artist wants to know what the back of Dr. Polaris's outfit looks like,
Okay.
or if Kurt Busiek, writes, "Hey, like in this scene that happened in this issue of whatever, I got to find that scene of whatever issue it is and scan it so we can send it to that artist so they kind of know what to draw."
Hmm.
There was lettering edits, and so DC had an in-house lettering department, and so we would get pages from scripts, and they would bring them back to us, and I would look over them for any typos, or if there was, any, if we needed to shift the balloon placement, any. Same thing with coloring notes. We would give notes on colors. There was also research involved. They had me do research on. They gave us each different titles to kind of break down, and so there was me and two other interns. I remember I broke down Blue Beetle and Checkmate. Just kind of to let people know, like, what was going on and all that. Um, and yeah, and then a lot of gopher work, bring these maybe sometimes helping write solicitation copy, bringing the solicitation copy down to marketing, coordinating with any departments that editorial needed. um, yeah, it was a really and then just really kind of just popping your head into everybody's office and figuring out, like, hey, is there anything you need at any particular moment in time? um, so yeah, it was a really wonderful experience. It just happened that it was during the recession. The Great
Yeah.
Recession hit right as I was interning, and so there were really no jobs to speak of at that point. They had already hired a wave of assistant editors just before I started, and
Hmm.
so it was really kind of uh, I felt very demoralized at the time. I was like, oh, I'd worked this hard to get into this internship, and it feels like the dream is dead before I could even begin. Um, but I really lucked out. I crossed paths with Janelle Aslan,
Hmm.
who was the new assistant editor of the Batman office at the time, and she was an alumni of Newsarama. She had kind of cut her teeth on the reviews team over there,
Hmm.
and I remember one of the editors I worked under at DC at the time was my future Devil that Wears My Face editor and Scouts Honor editor, Mike Martz, who was the Batman editor.
Yeah.
Mike got his start. Uh, I believe he either got his start or he spent some time at Wizard Magazine. And so he was one who said, like, if you can get your foot in the door in journalism, that might be kind of an illuminating experience for you and figure out exactly what you want to do in this
Hmm.
business. So Janelle introduced me to her editor, Troy Brownfield, at Newsarama. And Troy wound up being a real mentor for me, and wound up, passing his baton as the reviews editor to me. So I worked there for about a decade. I was covering everything that was coming out on a weekly basis, and it was a really good boot camp for me,
Hmm.
in terms of teaching myself how to articulate, like, what do I like about a comic, what don't I like about a comic. Really forcing me to show my work, and it kind of gave me my own sort of toolkit. I would say, oh, I really like the way that, say, Rick Remender paces a fight scene, or I really like the way that Jeff Johns does, is able to kind of tap into the metaphor of a character's concept and bring
Hmm.
that into the actual characterization. Or how the Babs Tarr run on Batgirl, how decompressed, or sorry, how compressed it was. That there were a lot of done in one stories in that, and so that really kind of uh, kept me in the industry for a long time while I figured out what I wanted to do. I thought for a long time I wanted to be an editor. Now that I'm on the other side of it, I think my editors deserve a Purple Heart. They have a very difficult job in this business, in that they got to keep all the trains running on time, and that's that's my least favorite part of the job, having edited some of my own work. So yeah, it wasn't until I met my fiance that I started kind of dipping my toe into writing. And at the time, I had told myself, oh, I would be like a better editor or development person if I knew how to. I could say I could break down a story by knowing how to create one. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until my first book came out, Spencer and Locke, that the response to that was so positive. And meanwhile, I was working a very grueling Hollywood assistant job, and I realized I had been putting the cart before the horse all these years. That if I know how to write a book, I could just do that, and spare myself a lot of heartache. So that's really I've been doing that kind of ever since. I've just been steadily working on project after project after project. I think Space Ghost is maybe my 10th or 11th series, I think, to date.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it's just been a really it's been a really rewarding career. It's the hardest job I've ever had. It's the most involved job I've ever had, but it
Really?
really is the most rewarding
So
career.
let's go back to that. Let's go back to the Space Ghost because we talked about how you first got started in the industry, and that's really cool that you stuck with it for 10 years at Newsarama. So you went through a lot of changes in
Yeah,
the way things ran, and of course how the website is now.
sure.
Um, and I guess you also learn to work with other people too, because
Yeah,
doing that kind of job lets you work with or allows you to work with a team and
yes.
learning to butt heads, but butt heads professionally.
Huh,
So, how is it that you got this particular job with
sure.
Space Ghost? Did you just let it out there into social media that, like, hey, anybody need a good Space Ghost story? And Dynamite just happened to reach out, or how did this
Well,
happen?
so I've known Nick Barucci
Mhm,
over at Dynamite for some time.
mhm,
Dynamite was one of the earliest beats I had when I was at Newsarama. I interviewed several Dynamite creators over their work, and so I've known Nick for a long time. I've known their editor Nate Cosby.
mhm.
I've emailed him for a long time. Every time I'd have a new book coming out, I would email them and just be like, "Hey, like I have a new series coming out. Here's a sample. If there's ever a good project that you think I'd be a good fit on, I hope you'll keep me in mind." And I think it was going back to back from Moon Knight, City of the Dead, and Punisher over at Marvel that Dynamite having made this deal with Warner Brothers to do this licensed comics initiative, they
Mhm.
thought, okay, David might be a good fit for Space Ghost. And so editor Joe Rybant, he reached out to me shortly before New York Comic Con, just before they announced this initiative. Um, and we met up at the show, and he said, "Listen, you know, you might have seen we just announced this publishing partnership with Warner Brothers, and you might have seen that Space Ghost is one of the books that we're going to be doing, and you're our top pick." So it was such
That's cool.
an amazing and flattering offer. And as I thought a little bit about it, you know, I kind of immediately clicked with a through line for this series. And the great thing about Space Ghost is, having watched all the original episodes as well as the '80s revival, um, those are short episodes.
Yes, they are.
Five, 5, 6 minutes a pop.
I was gonna ask you something because feel like we're about the same age.
Yeah,
So, did you also grow up with Space Ghost Coast to Coast?
yeah. I grew up with Space Ghost. That was my introduction to Space
Oh,
Ghost.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it wasn't honestly until my internship at DC that I started to learn a little bit more about like comics history and
Mhm.
learning about some of the seminal figures in the industry, including Alex Toth. And
Yeah.
that's when I realized, like, oh, Space Ghost is like, it wasn't just like an ironic talk show, that it got its start as like a
Yeah.
traditional superhero story, the same year that Adam West's Batman came out.
Mhm.
And and I think between that and I remember, I believe they had reprinted Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's Space Ghost trade while I was there. So I got a
Mhm.
copy of that and I read that over and I was kind of like, oh, like, you can see that it shares a lot of DNA with like Batman and Superman, and but sort of puts it into this almost Flash Gordon-y kind of sci-fi environment. And I think that was kind of in the back of my mind for a long time. But having been offered this project, I immediately took it upon myself. I rewatched everything.
Oh wow.
I told Joe that deep dive is the only way I know how to do it. And so I rewatched all of the 60s run. I rewatched all of the 80s revival. I read every single comic that I could get my hands on, and I took detailed notes on all of it. I gave Dynamite a 30-page document outlining kind of my thoughts and plans for this series, and the only thing that was longer than that was my notes document. But the thing about Space Ghost, for anyone who watched the original series, these are short episodes, 5-6 minutes a pop, sandwiched in between Dino Boy. And so that doesn't leave, there was no continuity, so to speak. There was never any sort of origin story. And when I talked with Dynamite about it, I was told, run with that. Like you can kind of create your own continuity with all this, because we have kind of a bigger runway with the comics. And so, yeah, I think for me, the thing that always stood out about Space Ghost, beyond, the obvious similarities to Batman, is that, somebody like Batman, for example, he had Robin, that was his chief sidekick. But for Space Ghost, for me, I was like, oh, he's got two, or he's got three.
With three, yeah, with the monkey.
Jan and Jace and Blip.
And
I thought, that's interesting. Like that kind of, and I think it speaks to something that's very personal to me of my own life, my own upbringing, is my younger siblings are triplets. And
oh, wow.
I was an only child until they showed up. And my parents always used to say, it's a good thing you're here, because otherwise we'd be outnumbered. And I think for Space Ghost, he's sort of the ultimate single dad in addition to being this like cosmic adventurer, is that he has really, at least 2 kids and a pet, or 3 kids, depending on how you want to look at it. And he's a little outnumbered. And it's sort of how does Space Ghost and his charges, the very act of them intersecting, the very act of them kind of coming together, how does that affect them? How does that kind of turn them from, say, being rescued orphans to how do they become sidekicks? How do they become trusted partners in their own right? How do they become kind of an unorthodox found family? And that really became, I think, the spine of this run. It is, of course, there's a ton of sci-fi action and adventure, because Space Ghost as a character has just an incredibly deep bench of iconic villains, thanks to Alex Toth. And so we are taking kind of a long Halloween approach, where we will be seeing as many of them as I can fit.
This is cool.
We're going to be seeing all sorts of villains. It's a big universe out there. But also each issue kind of will check in with each of these characters, where we're going to see their dynamic evolve on an issue to issue basis. And I think, I'm sort of rounding the bases on what I would consider to be our first arc. But I've fallen in love with these characters. And I think by the time that readers have read a couple issues, I think they'll fall in love with these characters too.
So when you're writing a character like this,
Sure.
I guess my question is, so there was the Alex Toth series, that was developed for TV in the 60s. And then, like I mentioned, there's a whole generation that got introduced through Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Right.
That's all they know, the goofy Space Ghost. And then there's the comics. And the comics get really interesting because, there's the Gold Key stuff. I think Marvel even had him for a while under the TV Stars maybe brand. There's Comico, there's Archie, the DC stuff, which is the latest stuff, right? Like that went all the way from the 90s until 2017. When you're approaching a character like this with that much history, how how do you handle that? Like, what
Sure.
approach do you take with him as to introduce new readers to this character? Like, are you gonna borrow I don't wanna say borrow, that's the wrong word, I'm sorry. Are you inspired rather by more so the TV show than the comic book adaptations?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Part of it is logistical. This is a different publisher,
Mhm,
and so like it doesn't feel right to be cribbing from another publisher of their continuity,
mhm.
especially because that continuity was also created whole cloth.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think definitely the original cartoon and the 80s revival, I view it as archaeology. That's
mhm,
why I rewatched every single episode and I took detailed notes on it, just to get a sense of like, okay, you know, who are the enemies that Space Ghost faces? Gian and Jace, and Blip, what are their personalities like?
okay,
Space Ghost's abilities. How do we kind of give that some additional context so that way readers can kind of follow along and figure out like, okay, this is how he does things,
mhm,
and these are maybe some limitations that he might have, and you know it really kind of helped raise the tension a little bit. But yeah, I think for me the thing to help onboard new readers is we're going to see, especially our first issue, it's very much through Jan and Jace's eyes. They are very much our,
okay,
our, our POV characters. And, we're kind of dropping them right into the thick of things. And that's a great way to get readers on board is that, like, they're going to be kind of catching up with all this the same way that Jan and Jace are, where we sort of are going to see Space Ghost in the same way that any kind of civilian might, which is like, oh, this guy's like a force of nature, and you're not always sure, you're not necessarily sure what to make of him when you first see him.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think it's also we get to kind of see these characters grow and evolve and change, and I think for me the thing that's so important, and this is something my editor at Marvel, Tom Brevoort, has really impressed upon me over the years, is that the thing that makes a superhero a hero is not punching out villains. It's looking out for the little guy. It's protecting civilians, and I think where Space Ghost's heroic turn comes from, is that without spoiling too much, that's how he first encounters Jan and Jace, is he's rescuing them as civilians, and then you kind of see as the series progresses, they're going to pay it forward, where they're going to help Space Ghost save other civilians, and I think that's like a really cool thing, and I think it anchors Space Ghost into a higher calling and a greater good beyond just the sci-fi adventure of it all. It really is. It's all about protecting the little guy first and foremost, and I'd say maybe reclaiming his humanity along the way.
So then I gotta ask the question, because as you stated, the whole Space Ghost and Dino Boy uh, TV show, right? It
Yeah,
was a lot of mini episodes. There
yeah,
were like what 40 something episodes of Space Ghost, I think. I just remember getting it on like one DVD, and I was really surprised that there weren't that many more.
right.
So the characters weren't that fleshed out. It was like
Yes,
a non-continual like story.
yeah,
A villain would show back up from time to time. And the one thing that always bothered me as a kid, because I liked superheroes even as a kid, and watching the old 60s cartoon, was that they never gave him like an alter ego name,
right.
right? It's not until we get to like, I really do think it was like Space Ghost Coast to Coast
It's
that they
Coast
were
to
like,
Coast.
they gave him like a ridiculous long name,
Yeah,
like Major Thaddeus something. I can't remember.
yeah. Tad Ghostal and
That's
the
it.
like.
That's it. Yeah,
Yeah, and then in the Joe Kelly run, they called him Thaddeus Bach,
Thaddeus back.
and in
Yeah.
Future Quest, they called him Captain Kier.
Mm,
So yes, our Space Ghost does have an alter ego,
okay.
but as you'll see, it's kind of an identity he hasn't really used in a long time.
Okay.
Without spoiling too much, there's a reason why Space Ghost has gone on this crusade to stop evildoers across the galaxy, and it's because the universe is a big place, and it's sort of just the law of scale and averages. the Galactic Patrol is not going to be able to stop every pirate that decides they're going to shake down a distant colony.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Space Ghost comes in. Is he is sort of he's plugging his finger in the dam as best he can. And if he hears a distress call at Sector Z, that's pirates are taking over space colony Omicron. Well, he knows that the police aren't going to show up in time, so he's going to do his best to stop these pirates. But he comes from a place of tragedy himself. There's a reason why he's been doing this, and as a result, when we meet him, he's been pretty isolated for a while. It's been kind of just him on Ghost Planet for a while.
Okay.
My thinking is that Space Ghost, when we first meet him, if you put him in a room with a pirate, he knows exactly what to do. He's very good with his fists, and his powers and his tenacity. But he's kind of like a B- human being at this point. Like, I think he hasn't really been able to exercise those social skills very much, and that I think adds to the conflict and friction when suddenly this guy who is not at all, his life is not at all geared towards children, suddenly finds himself protecting 2 kids and a monkey, and that I think adds a little bit of a nice contrast to this book. I think a lot of people have asked, is this going to be like a gritty, reboot of Space Ghost? And I would say no. This isn't like the Robert Pattinson's The Batman version of Space Ghost. I would say, tonally we fit somewhere between Batman the Animated Series and Batman the Long Halloween.
That's a good sweet spot for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think we are going to be introducing these villains with sort of additional context and backstory. Mm-hmm. I guess if I was going to invoke Robert Pattinson's The Batman in any way, it would probably be in that you saw how they gave additional context to the Penguin or the Joker or the Riddler. And so we're able to kind of do that a little bit with Space Ghost's iconic villains to really populate them in this universe in as organic a way as possible. And to just be as additive to these characters as we can. For example, without spoiling too much, Brack was a villain that readers will not have to wait very long for. And we added like a really fun little wrinkle to him that I think kind of situates him perfectly in this world, but also still honors the original vision of the character, which is, he's not a world taker. He's not out to conquer the universe. He is just like a dirty pirate who's like looking to just hit whatever the next gold shipment is. Like there's something almost blue collar about him to me. And so being able to do stuff like that with all of the villains, it's kind of our way of being able to sort of, put our stamp on this character and on this property, but also, still trying to remain true to the original vision. As they were presented in the 60s.
What's different about writing someone like Space Ghost compared to writing a character like the Punisher? Because with let me rephrase that, because the Punisher is also a new character to Marvel Comics.
Sure.
But as far as like working with the 2 different companies, because you're working with a character that's been around since the 60s, you're working with a character that is the Punisher name has been around since the 70s, sure. but he himself has only been the Punisher in your miniseries. So what's like the differences in the writing style and working with editors?
Boy, it's very different. I think those 2 projects feel very different to me. With our miniseries on Punisher, we're really building everything from the ground up. Readers kind of have an expectation of what a Punisher book is going to look like. That it's going to be kind of this lone man whose life has been just totally upended by tragedy, and it's him going on a quest for vengeance, and he's using his guns and his grit and his tenacity to do so, and he really kind of is putting fear into the criminal element, by doing so. But he's a man with no powers, just his own kind of grit and tenacity. But we put a lot of consideration into what Joe Garrison was going to look like and where he was going to come from. Just in how do we differentiate him from somebody like Frank Castle,
Okay.
and still have him be, you have to kind of walk that tightrope of he still needs to feel like a Punisher, but how do you do it in a way that he still feels distinct and has his own, has kind of cut out his own niche a little bit, but at the same time could stand toe to toe with somebody like Frank Castle if he ever encountered him. And so, we talked a lot about that, and also just like there's a lot of, I think, more than most characters out there, there is the Punisher. There's a lot of expectation from all across the political spectrum of what should this character be doing, what shouldn't this character be doing. What are any real world landmines that you have to navigate for a character like that? So we spent 2 months straight developing the character before we even kind of hashed out what kind of story he would be in. Because it's, you don't want to overcomplicate things. Frank Castle it's a pretty easy character to boil down if you want to mention him to anybody. His family was killed in a mob shootout, and he became a vigilante. And so we were really, that was our challenge, was to do something similar with Joe Garrison, whereas the John Wick of Shield is sort of the concept. Framed for his family's murder, he's trying to find the real culprits. And I think so that was a lot of development from the ground up. Whereas Space Ghost, if anything, actually, it was really an exercise in freedom. There was so much material to mine from, but like I said, there's no continuity, there's no backstory here. If anything, you get to see all these different component parts, and you have to say, okay, how do I give some context to this? What's the connecting thread here? And so, it was honestly, it was a ton of fun. I think the way that we're structuring it also really helps. And this is something that I've also picked up from my time at Marvel, is a lot of the books that I really enjoy the most over there. It's a lot of done in one adventures. You look at Ryan North's Fantastic Four, you look at Steve Orlando's Scarlet Witch.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned Ryan North's Fantastic Four.
You look at what Jed McKay is doing on Moon Knight. It's a lot of self-contained adventures, and given how many amazing, iconic villains that Space Ghost has, that's something we're going to be doing a lot of in this series. Is a lot of done in one adventures. That way, if you pick up an issue of Space Ghost, chances are you are going to get like a self-contained adventure, and we're going to save some of the two-parters or even the occasional three-parter for the really big moments. If Space Ghost is really on his heels, if he's facing a particularly big, bad, iconic bad guy, maybe we'll give that a 2-issue thing just to really kind of play up the tension. But yes, by being able to do that, by being able to kind of give readers self-contained adventures, it really kind of accelerates the investment. I think readers kind of know they've followed Space Ghost on this journey, and they've watched him kind of go through these trials and tribulations, this gauntlet of villains. And I think by doing that, rather than stretching it out over the course of 5 or 6 issues, here's one adventure, it really kind of lets us give readers the most bang for their buck. And hopefully you'll get to see kind of the wide variety and diversity of threats out there in the universe, which in turn gives us a wide diversity and variety of different types of stories we can tell.
So speaking of stories that you can tell, I wanted to talk to you about this, but I think you have enough time at New York Comic Con. You wrote the follow-up to Savage Avengers by Jerry Duggan. You wrote the Savage Avengers Volume 2.
Yeah.
At what point, because that's such a cool concept, right? It's like, hey, you get to tell the story of Conan the Barbarian living in modern time with a bunch of characters, right? At what point did you find out, well, crap, we can't use Conan anymore?
So for those
did you know going into the series, or did you during writing it, like while you were writing it?
Well, for those who haven't read my run on Savage Avengers, kind of the quick elevator pitch that as I had pitched it
Mhm.
was I was like, what if we did like Conan versus the Terminator? We did sword and sorcery
Yeah.
Terminator in the Hyborian Age. Conan is being hunted by a Deathlock from the future who rightly notes that he's a disruption to the time stream that needs to be erased. And in the ensuing fight between Conan and this Deathlock, a couple of heroes of the more savage variety kind of find themselves drawn into the crossfire, and Deathlock's time circuit is damaged, and they all get stranded in the Hyborian Age. And so I was really excited by that. But also, when Tom Brevoort had approached me for the book, he had said, like, it's up to you if you want to use Conan or not. And so when we started talking about it, I said, well, we could do this first storyline, and we could leave Conan in the Hyborian Age. It's he's there already. It's easy to
Mhm.
do. So I had just turned in my second issue when the word came down that, hey, things had changed. Conan Properties was under new ownership, and that the licensing agreement wouldn't be continuing. So I was told, you could have him up to issue 8 if you needed, but knowing that I was breaking these down in 5-issue chunks, that meant I was going to write him out by issue 5. And so thankfully, like I said, I already had the escape hatch built into the concept that like
Mhm.
we could have left him there. So that's what we wound up doing. But I think it was around, I think I was writing issue 4, or maybe 3, that it kind of occurred to me. I emailed Tom and I was like, are we the last Marvel book to have Conan in it? And he was like, yep. Um, and so that was a little intimidating, but
Mhm.
I think kind of coming up with that ending for Conan, ending with a page of Conan on his throne with his wife and child, and you can see like a tattered Avengers flag in the background. I was like, yeah, that feels like a cool way to kind of wrap up this era of Conan in the Marvel universe, that it affected him, that it impacted him, that it meant something to him. Yeah, it was a huge honor to be able to tell Conan's last story in the Marvel universe. And yeah, it's for me. I find that oftentimes restrictions is not a bad thing, for at least in this kind of business. I work really well off constraints because it kind of gives me something to push off of. Like, I
Mhm.
know, okay, Conan is going to be out in the 5th issue. Great. How do I do that in the most impactful way possible? Um, I think sometimes having too much rope you can hang yourself with it. And so I think, yeah, it's a wonderful experience. I mean, Savage Avengers continues to be um, the work I'm proudest of my Marvel career to date.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm still kind of chasing that book in a lot of ways. Um,
I like hearing that. You're
you
really
know,
proud of that one. That's cool.
yeah, I really, I can see where I was as a writer at that moment in time, but I've loved the Avengers and the concept behind the Avengers for so long that being able to write,
Mhm.
to come up with my own Avengers team, yeah, boy, what I wouldn't do to repeat the experience. It was such a great time, and the way that people responded to that book, um, it really meant a lot.
Yeah, it was good. Like, I when it was decided that it was coming to an end, the
Mhm.
whole thing,
Sure.
that was the book I was concerned about, is like new series, right? Because at any point Conan could appear anywhere, but it was that they were trying to crank out all the omnis of the original Marvel years, but I was I was really concerned because I always liked the idea, and it seemed like you had ideas for the long haul when it comes to the times
Well,
jumping, because you have somebody from like Deathlock, right? Which is great use of the
yeah.
character, and you have Conan coming from a different age altogether.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sort of this idea of like a sword and sorcery Terminator was really fun, and it's one of those things that I never would have wanted to stay on that book. Like I wouldn't have wanted to overstay my welcome on
Mhm.
that book. And when Marvel first approached me for it, they had said like we want you to come up with kind of a 10 issue plan. Um,
Okay.
and so the fact that they continued, they honored that commitment despite the fact that we lost Conan. I think that was really stand up of them. But of course, like I still have ideas in my back pocket. I had an idea for a third arc that I know my editors thought was really fun.
Mhm.
But it's one of those things. The market's very volatile right now. I don't begrudge anybody. Like Marvel committed to 10, we did 10, we wrapped it up in a way that I felt pretty satisfied with.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, if they ever had the call for me to do any more, I'd answer it in a heartbeat.
So you're not opposed to returning at any time to those characters.
No,
Awesome.
that roster, they were my babies. So yeah, anytime.
Awesome. I like hearing that. Okay. So what else are you working on? I know when I interviewed you, The Devil That Wears My Face, what's going
Yep,
on at Mad Cave,
yep,
and you've got Space Ghost going on. We didn't even talk about your Moon Knight City of the Dead. That was really
yeah,
cool because it it's in between if you're getting them in trade paperback. Volumes 4 and 5 of Jed McKay's run and
yep.
introduces a character to the Marvel comics that was part of the MCU. And I feel like it's an important read right before you read volume 5 of the trade, which comes out this week. Um, how was that experience writing Moon Knight?
Yeah, it was great. Moon Knight's such a fun character. I mean,
Mhm.
uh, and I think one that's very special to me. When I first book Spencer and Locke came out, um, one of the
But,
biggest
but, but
compliments that
by the way, somebody's asking Spencer and Locke Volume 3. I haven't started yet, but definitely will this month. Does it end after Volume 2 or will there be more?
We're hoping to get more. We're waiting to get the rights back for
Okay.
that book. But once those rights come in, that's on the agenda is to work on volume 3. George Santiago Jr. and I are both committed to doing that. And so, yes, I can't say when that'll happen. Unfortunately, the publisher involved has been pretty stubborn about reverting the rights back to any of the creators that haven't been paid. But yes,
Oh,
I think the gears of justice, they move slowly, but they will happen. I feel confident in that. So yes, I'm very excited to pick up on volume 3, but without spoiling too much, the gap between volumes 2 and 3, uh, they'll be addressed in story.
okay.
Uh,
Now, what were you saying
sure.
about uh,
Well, when Spencer and Locke came out, something that I took to be a huge compliment was somebody saying, "Oh, I would love it to see your take on Moon Knight," because that book was all about mental illness
mhm,
and detective work, and so I've been thinking about that for a long time. Of like, oh, if I had did something with Moon Knight, what would I do? And Moon Knight was almost on the roster of Savage Avengers. It was almost on the roster twice. I had mentioned him on the initial short list for the cast, and we had to cut a couple names down. I mentioned him. I mentioned Rachel Cole Alvis. Unfortunately, we had to make some cuts. And then the second volume, the second arc, we made a little bit of a pivot in that. That it was going to be originally like a dystopian future based on the cult of Set. But obviously, without Conan, we pivoted to the year 2099. And at the time, I thought maybe we could do a volume that was the Savage Avengers and the Savage Avengers of 2099 teaming
mhm.
up. And I very quickly realized that you cannot do a monthly book with like 14 characters and like do any of them justice.
Sure you can.
Uh, you know,
You may just get a headache.
I crammed in as many characters as I could in that
Mhm.
book between Jake Gallows and Doom 2099 and Ultron. So so Moon Knight was I had wanted to do like a post-apocalyptic version of Moon Knight in that, and I couldn't fit him in. So I had mentioned to Tom, I love Moon Knight. If there's ever an opportunity to do anything with them, I hope you'll keep me in mind. And it so happened that Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood, they were doing that anthology, and so they had me do a story with that with Leonardo Romero.
Yeah.
And so that got me this Moon Knight miniseries. And yeah, we were introducing Layla Al Fawley, the all new Scarlet Scarab from the Moon Knight TV show. I just finished watching it, and I thought she was honestly my favorite part of the whole series. And so I thought, oh, it could be additive to kind of bring her from the MCU to the comics in that way. If Jed or anybody else wanted to use her down the line, she's available. And yeah, it was a really great experience. I'd wanted to write something kind of in the vein of like Inception for a very long time, of sort of your memories and your mind kind of shaping the world around you. And I think Moon Knight's a perfect character for something like that. So having him travel to the city of the dead, this psychoreactive realm, to rescue the soul of a young runaway, it was really fun. Inception meets Taken, and Marcelo Ferreira and Sean Damian Hill did a fantastic job on the art on that book. And Jay Leiston and Rochelle Rosenberg really kind of unified their styles in a nice way. So yeah, it was a really fun experience. I love the character, and yeah, I feel like it's like a fun evergreen story, which was my goal for this book. Is that if all you know about Moon Knight is the Disney Plus show, this is a great way to kind of jump on board, and then you can kind of get in on Jed MacKay's amazing run from there. Yeah, I'm very happy with how that book turned out, and yeah, I'm really pleased with the reception we got for it.
Man, that's great. I love that somebody said, "I'd like to see your take on Moon Knight," and it actually happened.
And then a few years later, I made it happen.
Yeah.
So thank you to them. Thank you to Tom Brevoort for asking me. Yeah, it's funny. I will say that was the second idea I had for Moon Knight. I had pitched them on one other idea that I quickly realized I couldn't fit into 5 issues, but maybe someday with a longer runway, I would love to jump in on that because there's a really cool Moon Knight story that is not. I can't believe that it hasn't been told, and boy, I would love to be the one to tell it someday.
So, what about any other Marvel or DC character story that hasn't been told that you would love to tell, like long running or even a short little?
Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, there's a couple characters that I'd love to do stuff with. Doctor Strange has been on my bucket list for a long time. I say that every time I talk to a Marvel editor. Not that Jed MacKay is crushing it on Doctor Strange. I have no hurry for him to leave that book. So that would be a really fun one. War Machine. I'd love to do something with War Machine. I've loved that character since I was a child. I wrote my first ever fan letter to Marvel asking about War Machine because I just
that's awesome. Seriously, War Machine, Rhodey?
War Machine. Great. I didn't know anything about him, and it was kind of pre-internet. And so I remember they sent me an issue of War Machine. It was the issue where he fights Tony because Tony wanted his suit back, and Rhodey had a damaged suit. And,
yeah.
And they sent me an animation cell from the Iron Man cartoon.
Wow, that's back when they mailed people things back, and an animation cell nonetheless. Wow, that's really cool.
I think it was like a design. It was like a character design. So that kind of thing. And so War Machine would be super fun. Yeah, there's a few, I'd love to do another team book. Just team books in general, I think speak to my strengths a little bit.
Okay.
And then DC, there's so many amazing characters. There's Superman, Shazam, the Flash, Uh, I've got a real soft spot for characters like Firestorm and Dr. Fate and Etrigan the Demon. Um, Actually, if I ever got a chance to do anything with Etrigan, Etrigan was the very, 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 very first comics pitch I ever tried.
While you were an intern at DC?
Yeah, I prepped I tried making an Etrigan pitch when I started there, not knowing really anything about the business. I didn't know if they were ever going to ask me to write anything, so I had something prepared just in case. But yeah, Jason Blood's such a fun character. I like him a lot.
Man, you're having. I remember when reading Burns' run of Etrigan.
Yeah,
You gotta come up with words to rhyme sometimes.
yep,
What about the big guy, Superman? Do you like to
yeah.
do a Superman story or miniseries?
I would love to do something Superman related. I feel a real kinship to Superman. You know,
Mhm.
I I too am, a Jewish Midwestern former journalist. I worked at a newspaper as my day job while I was at Newsarama. So I
Mhm.
feel like a real strong connection to Clark. And just sort of the fact that like he's, I really responded to a lot of stuff that like Grant Morrison did, where like he's got the power, which means he's also got like the bandwidth to be understanding to people.
Mhm.
The fact that like he is, functionally invincible. I mean, there are some bad guys that can kind of make him, catch his breath, but like he's somebody who's tough enough, which means he's the one who can reach out and he can be understanding. So yeah, I would love to write Superman in any capacity at any time. Um, yeah, I mean, and of course, Batman. I've got a fun Batman idea that, like, if I ever, you know, could do like the Brave and the Bold, I'd love to do just, a quick thing with that. Um, oh, the Legion of Superheroes. I forgot about that. Legion of Superheroes is really fun. The Outsiders are really fun. Um, of course, the premier super teams, the Justice League and the Avengers. Like, I think if I ever got to write them, I mean, I did get to write the Avengers and Avengers Unlimited, and it was one of the most gratifying experiences I've ever had in this business. So, yeah, I don't think there's any sort of bad characters out there. I think there are
There's,
very few that I
there's
don't.
no bad characters. Oh,
I
dang.
think there are very few that I wouldn't be able
Wow.
to find an angle on. I can. I will. I'll never say their names, but I think there's only two that I've encountered so far that I haven't been able to think of something for them.
I was I was thinking about that, like, because I've asked that question before to people that have written team books, right, or editorial mandated crossover. Has there ever been a character that you're like, oh gosh, I remember when I interviewed Torun Grumbeck, she was
Mhm.
so mortified to be writing Spider-Man because she's like, I can't do funny.
Mhm.
What am I gonna do? This guy makes everybody laugh. And I believe, yeah, Jason Aaron kind of calmed her down. He was like, "Oh, you'll always remember your first Spider-Man line. Like
Yeah.
it will live with you forever." And he's like, once you write it, he kind of gave her that advice. Have you ever had that moment when you were like, "This character means a lot to people. I can't f this up." Like,
Yeah. I can tell you exactly. Yeah. It was writing minor spoilers. It was writing Miles Morales as our Deathlock in Savage Avengers.
okay, yeah.
I That is a character who, it's funny. Like I feel a lot of affection towards Miles. I reviewed his very first appearance. If you look at the
So it goes
Wikipedia
back.
page for Miles Morales, you'll find a review from me on there. So having him be a part of my first Marvel work, is one of those things when I had pitched when I pitched Deathlock versus Conan to Tom Brevoort, not knowing that Tom was one of the original editors on Deathlock. Um,
Mhm.
that I said the cool thing about Deathlock is you can staple him to any character and it's additive. So you could, it could be, you know, a Wolverine or a Captain America or, and so you get to add those powers to whatever the Deathlock suite of technology is. And when I had first pitched the book, I had pitched James Rhodes as Deathlock. because obviously, like I said, I'm a big War Machine fan. But also, I had been thinking as a loose as a dangling thread from Brian Bendis's Iron Man run, where Rhodey is killed fighting Thanos, and Tony kind of brings Rhodey back. And I thought, what if there was a Deathlock made out of the parts that didn't come back? You know.
Mm.
And Tom rightly said, well, that's fine, but like it'd be better if you found a character with powers, something that could be kind of additive, especially if you want this Deathlock to like fight an entire team of superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent the weekend thinking about it, and I was like, who's got some cool powers that could absolutely wreck a superhero team if it was just, left to his own devices, it'd be Miles. And so I asked, could we do Miles Morales? And, if we treated him with like the utmost respect. And, I think Miles already had a big impact when Miles came out. But then after Spider-Verse, I think he really took on
Oh, right. You were writing him after. Yeah.
And so for me, I think it was really kind of leaning into like, he's a beloved character. How do we make this Deathlock as, beloved? And so I think it was writing that 4th issue of Savage Avengers where we got to see what happened to Miles in his future reality, what turned him into a Deathlock. And
Mm-hmm.
I pitched it as Barry Allen sacrificing himself in Crisis on Infinite Earths. But let's do that for Miles. And seeing the way that people responded to that sequence, Miles fighting the Annihilation Wave by himself. That I think was a real career highlight. And because Miles is a character that means so much to so many people. And so being able to contribute even a little bit to that legacy, it's a lot to wrap your mind around, but it's something I'm very grateful for. And I would Miles is another character that I would love to tackle again in any capacity.
I think I like hearing stories about things coming back home. You wrote this review of Miles Morales without any idea that
of what the future would hold.
Yeah, and I like that. It makes for a really good story, and I think when you get to write the character, it means a lot more, right? Oh, I remember writing about this character, and now here I am writing the words that are coming out of his mouth. It's pretty interesting that you went with War Machine. I like that character too, Rhodey. Not a lot of people want to write a Rhodey story, and I mean he's had a couple of miniseries and a Max series, and been in several teams and been
write your congressman. I got a War Machine idea that's been burning a hole in my pocket for some time, and I would what I wouldn't do to write it.
So really, the Punisher would be writing the Punisher as a replacement Punisher for Frank Castle. You were already ready to write that story because you already experienced that with the character of James Rhodes, right? And replacing Tony Stark. Yeah, that's good. I like that. So yeah, what else? What else is in the works for you in the future?
Space Ghost is coming out in May, and we've got Dynamite has given us a pretty generous runway already. So I've got this. Knock on wood, barring any catastrophe, this will be my longest run on a series to date. I've got that. We're wrapping up The Devil That Wears My Face.
Mm-hmm.
Issue 6 is coming out also in May. So you can pre-order both of those at your local comic shop right now. Let's see. What else am I working on? Let's see. There's a couple. I've got a couple projects that are in the works that haven't been announced yet. I have a creator-owned graphic novel that we are just kind of like ironing out the last contractual bits right now, but that is that's already very deep in the development process. So
okay.
I knock on wood, I hope people will see that either end of this year or early next year. I'm working on another big 2 project right now that I don't know exactly when that's coming out yet. That's still kind of early days. I think beyond that, it's just a lot of Space Ghost in my future. Jonathan Lau, who I have yet to shout out, but he is an amazingly, tremendously talented artist. But he's also the fastest artist I've ever worked with. So he can crank out an issue in about 3 weeks. And so that means he's kind of coming after me like a Terminator. And so I have to stay ahead of him as much as humanly possible.
Okay.
But yeah, I think Space Ghost and Devil are the books that people can jump in on right now, as well as you can pre-order our trade paperback for Punisher, The Bullet That Follows. You should be able to pre-order that soon if it hasn't popped up on the previews already, as well as Moon Knight City of the Dead, which is available everywhere comics are sold, as are both of our volumes of Savage Avengers.
So it sounds like you are going to be keeping busy.
Yes.
How about any con appearances? Are you going to be at any conventions coming this year?
I will. So I am prepped for a few shows already this year. I'll be doing WonderCon in Anaheim. So if anybody's there, feel free to come visit. I believe I'm on a Breaking Into Comics panel that Friday at 4 p.m. So come find me on that. I'll be doing C2E2.
Hey, we'll be there too.
So find me there. I'll be with the comic sketch art crew. And I am planning on San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con as well.
So it sounds like you are going to be busy. That's great. And hopefully there'll be more good news at this New York Comic-Con with some announcements that somebody will hit you up going, hey, David, you were our number one choice to write this character.
I'll take it.
You heard of War Machine?
Yes. Write your congressman, because yes, War Machine is one of my favorites. And yes, like my Moon Knight story that has yet to be told, I have a concept for him that is a love letter to the era I grew up reading him in, and I'm surprised no one's done it yet. And knock on wood, no one will do it until they ask me to do it.
Awesome. Just wanted to highlight some of the greetings for you.
Oh, hi.
Your work, and
oh my
I did
goodness.
show the Spencer and Locke comment earlier.
Yeah.
But you are getting some love for The Devil That Wears My Face, which is
Thank
about to
you.
wrap up, you said, in May?
Yes. So I'm working with the amazing Alex Cormack on this book.
Great artist.
Alex is one of the most talented artists I've ever worked with. For those who haven't read The Devil That Wears My Face, it's Face Off meets The Exorcist. It's about an 18th century Vatican priest who is called to perform an exorcism on the son of a Spanish nobleman. Unfortunately, the ritual backfires, and so he is trapped in this Spanish nobleman's body, while the demon known as Legion has taken over Vieri's body to wreak havoc in the Vatican. And yeah, without spoiling too much, issue 5 just came out last week. And yeah, Legion really ramped up his end game to a pretty surprising level. But I can't wait for people to read issue 6. There's a gap month, so it'll be coming out in May. But yeah, I just turned in. I just looked at the final lettering pass on it just last week. I'm so proud of the work that Alex and I have done. I think it's one of the best books I've ever written. And there's a twist coming in issue 6 that's going to really turn the whole series on its head. I can't wait for people to check it out. But it's a book that's really near and dear to me. It's my first horror book, and hopefully not the last.
Well, I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And a big thank you to Vincent for putting all this together, and the folks at Dynamite. And I don't think you can answer this because nobody can really answer this. But just out of curiosity, how long is Space Ghost? Like, is it as long as people keep buying, or are you just given like, here's 6 issues, have fun?
Yeah. I wish I had an answer for that. Yeah. What I can say is, I have planned out a year on this.
Oh, okay. Nice.
But that said, if the demand is there, there's certainly room to expand. It's one of those books, I don't want to overstay my welcome on any book. I would much rather wrap it up while as long as I have something to say. But yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing about Space Ghost, is that he's got such a deep bench of villains that, yeah, I mean, there's certainly more things we could add in. So yeah, pre-order the book, because yeah, if the demand is super high, I would certainly not say no to writing more.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. And I'm glad that you are given this chance to write this character, and holy crap, you did a lot of research on him, so you're ready to tackle this and give it your own spin.
Yeah.
And when does the book come out?
Yes, the book comes out May 1st, the Wednesday before Free Comic Book Day. So be sure to check that out. I believe I will be signing at Emerald Knights Comics in Burbank that weekend, as well as the Comic Bug in Culver City, I believe on Sunday. So yeah, tell your local comic shop, pre-order Space Ghost. Final order cutoff is April 8th, and we have a ton of covers from Francesco Mattina, Bjorn Behrens, Michael Cho, and Jay Lee, and as well as blank covers, foil covers, version covers, line art covers, you name it. We got tons of them. So yeah, call your local comic shop, add us to your pull list. This is going to be a fun story for newcomers and veterans alike. You do not need to have watched a single episode of Space Ghost to appreciate this book. But if you do, and you have, then you're going to find all sorts of Easter eggs for the diehard fans.
Awesome. Looking forward to Space Ghost. Great to hear that. And big thank you to David for joining us today, for taking time out of his busy schedule. Hopefully I'll get to run into you at C2E2.
Yes, looking forward to it.
So, and if anybody goes to any of those shows, make sure to go drop and say hi to David.
Yes,
and a big thank you again to Dynamite for setting all this up. Go and check out Space Ghost May 1st. But in the meantime, go and check out all his other work that can be in collected editions. And then Mad Cave is also going to release a trade, I believe.
Yes.
When does that come out?
I guess that would probably be June, probably July or August.
Okay, I thought I saw it in September.
Oh, maybe September.
But that can move at any time. At any time. Thank you all so much for watching. Hit that like button on the way out. That's it for us, everybody. Have a great evening. We are